We do this every day, Monday through Friday, at noon Eastern, 11 Central, 9 Pacific. That's kind of an old guy thing to say. Do they still do that on television? Eastern, Pacific, Mountain, whatever. We still have those time zones, so why wouldn't they? My name is Brooks Melchior of Sports by Brooks. Our producer is Cam Smith. Coming up on the show, we're going to talk to John Talty, sports editor at AL.com. Great stories lately from John. LSU freak. If I have to explain that to you, too bad. We'll also talk about the SEC broadcast rights and the SEC, of course, championship weekend coming up. It's a huge weekend for college football, to say the least. And then we'll talk about what's going on with the Cowboys and the Texans and lots of other stuff with the eminent John McClain, Houston Chronicle columnist. Nobody knows more about Houston sports, Texas sports. Nobody's been around longer and is as prominent in Texas media as John McClain. First time on the show, coming up later in the hour. And then next hour, we'll have the college football professor. No better person to have on to talk, to kind of predict what's going to happen with the college football playoff. And he does it analytically. And then later, we'll have Kevin Turner in Dallas to talk more about the Cowboys. And specifically, we'll talk about point spreads and the over-under. That's with Kevin Turner coming up later on in the show. So we've got the Cowboys covered. I want to first, before we get going, of course, if you watch this show, you know what's going on with the Cowboys. You knew on Labor Day when I told you it's not Jason Garrett. It will never be Jason Garrett. It will never be the coaching staff. The problem with the Cowboys will not stop until Jerry Jones stops talking and hires a real coach. That's it. So I want to run some clips from this morning and last night, very, very short, from media reaction from people who you know. So Cam Smith, our producer, go ahead and run these clips of the reaction of the Cowboys after their disastrous performance against the Bears last night.
Happen. Second down and 10, a gain of 3.
Living in Dallas, Joe, I just have to bring it up that there's a lot of discussion as to whether or not Jason should keep his job now. If something shouldn't happen during the season, but you have to ask yourself, who on that staff has earned the right to be an interim head coach? I can't think of one guy who's done a good enough job with his position.
Wow.
Much less a coordinator.
Brutal.
That you would put in that seat. So.
Greeny, I grew up in Dallas. Every Friday, right about now, the garbage men come to pick up the trash. They need to stop by One Cowboys Way and collect Jason Garrett's playbook. Because that performance last night was awful. And here's why it was so awful. If it was just in an incubated, isolated performance, you could have some grace. It was the exact same thing we saw last week on Thursday night in Buffalo. I said it last week in Greeny. I'll say it again. Insanity. Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different...
Well, look, they start the game off with a great drive. That's a game plan drive.
Mike Lombardi.
And then when they have to make adjustments. I think Jason Garrett, Warren Sharp had a stat that Jason Garrett has won 4 games in his entire 10-year career when trailing at halftime. They just don't make adjustments. And I think the Cowboys are poorly coached. And I don't think it's just offensively. I think it's on defense, too. Troy Aikman was saying, or should I always say Hall of Famer Troy Aikman?
Thank you.
Okay, Hall of Famer Troy Aikman was saying last night that, they don't disguise their coverage. It's a high school coverage. It's a cover 3 high school coverage. And Mitchell, give him credit, made enough throws to win the game. So, look, I think this problem is deeper than Jason Garrett. I think this is really? Jerry Jones wanting to run the team. And since he's lost Jimmy Johnson, it hasn't really worked. Really, and if you want to call a spade, they quit. They just they have not. I mean, they're quit. They're just not playing for the coach. Jerry can say he's not going to fire Jason Garrett, but the team has already fired him.
Whoa.
The team has already fired him.
Hey, that was a deep one right there. That was a deep comment right there.
But the problem is this. Look, Jason right now, Jason
Louis Riddick
absolutely looks like a shell of himself. Okay, because coaches don't only coach players, they coach coaches. That's what the head coach does. Do you see him ever even talking to Chris Richard? Do you see him even talking to Kellen Moore? He stands there kind of with that half-cocked head, look to the side, and he doesn't move. He just doesn't move. And when you do that, it's almost like what is going through his mind? And I don't mean to sound, I don't mean to be rude or be disrespectful, because being a head coach, look, that's a once-in-a-lifetime achievement in the NFL. There's only 32 jobs. I get that. And, Jason, I played against you. So, I understand. I mean, you have made it to the top. But the fact of the matter is you look like someone who looks like he has checked out. And the players on the sideline last night, we've all seen it. Yep. They look checked out. And when that happens, Jerry says, look, he's just trying to get to the playoffs, right? And he said his team has no shot if he removes the head coach.
Wow. Hey, can we play? And I want to play, when you talk about quitting, I want to show this one clip. Can you play that highlight clip from last night of the Bears and the Cowboys, Cam, that we set up for the show today? The highlight clip. I know I said we weren't going to do it before we had our first game.
One tackle missed.
Watch this closely. This is quitting right here.
He keeps again.
That's quitting.
One-on-one. Tackle missed. Touchdown.
That's not Lamar Jackson. That's not Lamar Jackson.
What a night for number 10.
Mitch Trubisky. How many times has he done that? 0. How about that? And we have some little highlights in here for you. I thought I'd throw in there. This is Dak. The Cowboys are 1-4, by the way, since Dak started doing this. But this is last night for the game. I thought I'd throw some Jason Witten in there for you as well. Reaction, response. You think Witten wishes? Well, maybe he doesn't wish he was in the broadcast booth. I think a lot of people probably at this point wish he was, though, with Monday Night Football compared to Booger, which I don't know. But it's always one of those things where Booger's a great guy. I'm sure he's a really nice man. It's not personal, but master of the obvious. That's the elephant in the room. Master of the obvious. Booger McFarland. He's a guy who should be on college football. I'm not saying he's not good on the air. He is slick, polished on the air with his presentation. Just not a lot of depth there, unfortunately. Joe Tessitore, again, I think he's a guy who should be on college football. I think if you did a poll, this is not to denigrate these guys. It really isn't. It's just I think they're better suited and more comfortable. That could be your number 2 team, I think, for ESPN for college football. Of course, everybody at ESPN or those guys would be like pushing back. I understand. Monday Night Football is a big deal. And I think ESPN is looking to hit a home run, maybe get a Peyton Manning for the booth, and I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, what's Peyton Manning doing right now? He does so much media. He's so tied up with that stuff. Doing the Peyton Places, which is a great series for ESPN Plus, and doing all the commercials and everything else. And then occasionally you see him out at games, and I know he's involved with the University of Tennessee, but you just wonder, what is his next big move going to be, or will there be a next big move? But is he going to go into broadcasting or front office stuff? Interesting. Peyton Manning figuring that out. But I have no doubt that ESPN has given him a blank check for Monday Night Football. All right. I mentioned before we get John Talty on the line with us from AL.com to talk some college football. I mentioned on Twitter, I teased it, if you will. And this is where I'm breaking news. This is where it happens on this show live, because I like to do it this way because I can provide the nuance that is necessary when I provide information. I've got some exclusive information that I got this morning from a source, a very plugged in source, about the offensive coordinator job at Texas. I was told this morning by a very good source that Graham Harrell, who was the offensive coordinator last year at USC, has turned down the offensive coordinator job at Texas. Graham Harrell will not be taking that job. And Harrell, right now, who is already interviewed for Texas San Antonio, which we told you a couple of days ago before it came out in the media, He is also interviewed for another head coaching position, but Harrell's all in on UTSA. So we'll see where that goes. Maybe that's an indication he's got a job in hand. We'll see. One thing we do know is he will not be back at SC, and that was reported long ago. One more reason why SC right now is in a weird place, because it's the classic example of people who have expectations, right, and feel like they're not being met, even though the program on the surface, when it comes to wins and losses, doesn't look like it's in all that bad a position. The problem that you have with Clay Helton is, and I think there's probably some people watching this right now, the problem that you have is the recruiting class this year is terrible. And when you're in year 5 and that's happening, and this is the worst recruiting class since I've been in Los Angeles, which is like 19 years, by far. All right, we've got 2 weeks. Now, SC under Helton notoriously has been known for making up ground at the last second. We'll see if they can do it again. But so you've got the problem with recruiting. You've got an equally big problem with the staff. Now Harrell is leaving. When you look at the offense, you've got Slovis there. Obviously, future All-American, future first-round pick in the NFL draft, in my opinion. You don't hear people saying that yet, but I think he is. He's a true freshman. Compare him to Bo Nix. There's no comparison. So you've got Slovis sitting there. Now, was USC's consistent success on offense because of Slovis or Harrell? I would tend to say Slovis. I think it was Slovis more than it was Harrell. Could be wrong, because we saw Matt Fink play very well as well. It seemed like whoever SC plugged in there this year did very well. So it could be Harrell. But of course, you've got Helton running the air raid himself. Though under Helton, the offense has been much more inconsistent, and the success of the offense has really been a function of the talent of the quarterback. That may have changed this year with Harrell, with the system that he helped to implement this year. We'll see next year, because Harrell's not coming back. And these things were announced with Harrell before he had interviewed for 2 head coaching jobs this week, and before he went down the road with Tom Herman as a possible offensive coordinator. And the word on the street is that Harrell and Herman aren't the best of friends, don't really get along. And I think if you're Harrell and you look at that situation at Texas, it has the earmarks of an impending disaster. People, I'm sure, say, don't read too much into the headbutting episode before the game against Baylor. Sorry, I'm going to read a lot into it. That was bizarre. And the performance of the team, I mean, right now, people aren't pointing out they should have lost to Kansas. They absolutely should have lost at home to Kansas. Kansas blew that game. So now I want to bring in senior sports editor for AL.com, John Talty, who is the guy you should be following on Twitter at JTalty, JTalty, because he's one of these guys in sports media. They pop up all over the place, who come up with different angles, different stories that are different but relevant, which is what I try to do. But John, I can't thank you enough for coming on today. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate all those kind words you said. I've enjoyed your work for a long time, so I totally get what you're saying. That
makes one of you in Alabama who enjoys my work. But so let's talk about some of the things you've been working on. The LSU Freak stuff. If people don't know, this is a guy who has done the animated GIFs way before animated GIFs was cool, right? And and so now all of a sudden he's reemerged. What's the story? Because you actually got a hold of the guy.
Yeah, and so I think anytime anybody who was popular at one time, they kind of disappear, or you don't see them.
Like me.
Well, yeah, it actually applies.
Elephant in the room, right?
Yeah, when I'm sure you know it better than anybody, that there's always this fascination around, hey, like whatever happened to that person. And so, I remember loving his work, and I remember kind of going back and, sometimes just on random days, like looking up some of the old stuff he did and making me laugh and thinking, I haven't seen him do anything in a long time. And so I've always kind of had that curiosity of like what was happening to this guy. And then, I covered the Alabama LSU game, great game, all these different angles and stuff like that. And you kind of think, we covered it and all that. And then he pops up with this GIF out of nowhere. And, just really made me interested in kind of like what brought him back essentially. And, I always tell our reporters, it's always worth making that phone call, trying to find out what the story is. And, he told me this story about, being a hospice nurse and kind of being like, kind of life just making it not fun for him to do it anymore. And I just thought it ended up being a way more interesting story than even what I thought it could be. And hopefully people enjoyed it.
It has to be kind of weird for a guy like that. I mean, we were trying to figure out why it's not fun anymore. And it takes a lot of effort, as he mentioned, but I don't think you can exaggerate just how popular he was. If I'm not mistaken, I mean, the stuff that he was doing at one point was showing up on ESPN.
Oh, yeah.
He was showing up on game. This guy was a legend. But that being said, in this unique situation in history that we're in with social media and the web and the message boards and all that stuff, you can be this kind of legendary figure, but, well, I'm not making any money and I'm spending all this time. And what is it going to get me? And I think that's maybe part of it for him. I don't know.
No,
but this guy was literally like, this is the kind of guy who, when we have retrospectives and films, if he keeps going as he's doing it right now, a little longer, he's going to be showing up in the history of SEC football, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit on a point that, is totally right. And I talked to him a little bit about it, and now, like, when he was, first doing it early part of 2000, it was just, we lived in a different world and how people do things. Like now he could just set up, whether it's Patron or GoFundMe or something like that. Right. And like he could make money off if he wanted to do it. Now, back then he really didn't know, there wasn't really an easy way to find a way to get people to pay just for what he was doing. And so he was really just kind of doing it on the side. He couldn't really find a way to like monetize it. And so when you're spending money on different, Photoshop and things like that, and you're not really getting anything out of it, in terms of finances, well, then when you're not having fun doing it either, then like it's going to be easier to kind of like walk away from it. And so, hopefully not only does he continue to do it, but I'm also hopeful that, maybe there is a way for him to monetize what he's doing, because I think people do really enjoy it.
Yeah, it is ironic that he ends up kind of checking out right when things are taking off. We're talking to John Talty, the senior sports editor at AL.com. You also had, you're on the vanguard of sports media, because we really don't get a lot of stories like what you have with the SEC rights, which I think is a really important story for a lot of different reasons, but mainly because of the resources it's going to provide the college football and college basketball programs. It's kind of a discussion that's not mentioned so much, but first off, what's the situation right now with SEC television rights?
Yeah, and so that they're going to come open a few years from now, but there's already kind of discussions happening. And so, CBS wants to keep their rights, as they should. They do huge numbers. Even the Iron Bowl, which had lost a little something heading into it, still did huge numbers. I think it was the third highest rated game of the year, behind Alabama LSU as one of them. And I think Fox, it was Michigan, Ohio State was number 2. And so it's a highly valuable property. And to this point, CBS has been only paying $55 million a year, which might seem like a lot of money, but it's really not in this world.
Unbelievable.
And so especially when you think about, that Fox is paying, approximately $240 million to the Big Ten. And so comparing those two, that's a lot of money left on the table. And so people expect the SEC to get a lot more money this time around. And it's kind of, the question is not only how much are they going to get, to your point, and how much all of that can help SEC schools. They're already getting a lot of money from TV, but this is another way to allow them to kind of break off from the pack even more. I mean, at this point, Big Ten and SEC are really getting, such a large amount, and that's going to get bigger and bigger. And, I know you've got some West ties, Pac-12, that's going to be an even bigger issue for them going forward, that they're getting left behind when it comes to TV revenue. Then your other big thing is just, where does this go? Is it ESPN? Is it Fox? Like, who gets this big piece of property?
This, to me, is a big issue, because college football, if any commercial spectator sport is a function of television, it's college football. And the example is ESPN, because ESPN created the playoff. We didn't have a playoff in college football, and that's really what has defined college football for 150 years. John Skipper woke up one morning, and because he felt good, I don't know, he went to Starbucks and got something new, wrote this enormous check, and that's what created the college football playoff. And that's why I think we've got an impending battle for these broadcast rights. You just mentioned, I mean, the SEC has almost all of the top rated games this year for college football. We all know that they get 2 slots in the college football playoff. It seems like every year. But think about ESPN, ABC, Disney paying $120 million for one Monday Night Football game per Monday Night Football game. CBS is paying $55 million for the entire year. So, and this is something that is the reason that Texas, to my point, Texas A&M and Missouri would probably not be in the SEC right now if it wasn't the prospect of the money they're already making. Now add on to what is going to be, I think, an exponential increase. And this is something that really does shake the ground of college football. What kind of battle do you think there's going to be? Do you think ESPN, Disney, ABC, are they really pushing? And is this going to be a huge war for the SEC? Because that's what I foresee, because college football is so important to ESPN, arguably more important than the NFL and the NBA. What are your thoughts? Because I'll be honest, John, I don't think CBS is going to be able to keep them. I really don't think that's going to happen.
There's a growing feeling, I would say, and I know you're plugged into this stuff too. There's a growing feeling that CBS won't be able to keep it. I talked to somebody recently that thought that, and I wrote in my story that there's a possibility that, CBS and ESPN, in some ways, they can rotate the game where they both get a piece of it. I was talking to somebody yesterday who thought that you could see if CBS were to keep it, you could see a possible scenario in which they team up with like a Turner, the way they have with March Madness, to kind of get some extra money in there and try to give some extra viability to the SEC. I do know that it is a major priority for ESPN to get the full thing. I mean, to this point, they already own a lot of the inventory, but they're not getting the SEC championship game, which people believe in itself is worth more than the $55 million that CBS is paying. And you're not getting that top pick. So most years you're not getting the Iron Bowl. You're not getting Georgia, Florida. You're not getting Alabama, LSU. You're missing that marquee game every week, and ESPN wants it. And they're heavily tied in with the SEC network, and all their games on ESPN. And so it's a major priority for them to just own it all. Whether the SEC actually wants ESPN to own it all, I think is in question. I think that they've, to this point, have liked that they're getting
like
kind of
NFL.
Multiple different things.
They're kind of like the NFL. They want to keep it, and they want people bidding off each other, right?
100%. And so you're going to see, I mean, it's obviously everybody knows it's going to be a lot more than $55 million going forward. CBS is going to have to step up. They've indicated that they will step up. They've been making a push to try to get a deal done. I don't get a sense that the SEC is in any rush to get a deal done right now because they don't have to. They have all the leverage. And I think you're going to see a lot of different people try to get involved. I could see Fox getting involved too. And the SEC is going to have to just weigh the options that it wants to go. But they're definitely getting more money. And it's really just choosing kind of which path they want to go, whether they want to go all in with ESPN, ABC, or just try to keep it kind of multiple partners the way they have the last couple of years.
We're visiting with John Talty, the senior sports editor for AL.com, and he's written an article about the SEC broadcast rights way out in front on people on this story, but it's a huge story. One big part of this story, and it's a big part of the story, is the fact that CAA, the agency, the talent agency that is this behemoth that represents so many different college football coaches, with Jimmy Sexton on board at CAA and the NFL, of course. And then you've got broadcasting, and you've got Nick Khan. And Nick Khan represents Kirk Herbstreit. He represents Joe Tessitore. He represents Paul Feinbaum. And so you have that element. And I guess CAA, are they not kind of the gatekeeper on these SEC? I mean, the SEC has contracted CAA to be the gatekeeper, and the individual entity, Nick Khan specifically, I think it is, to negotiate their broadcast rights arrangement. What do you think that means? What is there a factor there?
Yeah, and I think that there is. And talking to different people, again, you can look at Nick has deals with a lot of people. He represents, I think, Skip Bayless and Colin Cowherd, and so. I think the CAA camp would push back that he's all in on ESPN, ABC. But, I have heard from people that are in these meetings that when, Nick Khan is kind of going over the different options for the SEC, when he's talking to the presidents and chancellors and key people, that he is definitely highlighting that there are more advantages to being aligned with Disney right now than there are with CBS. And some of that, I think, was the questions about how CBS and Viacom, how that merger was going to go and what that would impact their ability to spend and things like that. But again, from the people that I've talked to, they feel like he has been kind of guiding them more towards being closer aligned with Disney and ABC.
Well, what's really interesting is, and this is the stuff that's never really talked about, but Bobby Burak, who comes on the show occasionally, a friend of the show here from the Big Lead, wrote a big article in which he mentioned Nick Khan prominently. For the first time I've really seen Nick Khan's it's the Wizard of Oz. He's the man behind the curtain, I believe, or the closest thing to it outside of ESPN, as far as ESPN is concerned. But think about the article that came out in the Big Lead by Bobby Burak about Paul Feinbaum. And Paul Feinbaum is a prominent client of Nick Khan. Nick has a lot of prominent clients. I know he does, but Feinbaum's very prominent. He's the face of the SEC network, and Nick's involved now with SEC broadcast rights. And what Bobby is reporting is that Feinbaum had his salary cut in half, and now he's been on a plane half the time. He's been traveling to Bristol, which he hadn't normally. So it's a pain in the ass for Paul Feinbaum, basically. So now when you hear Nick represents him and we're presenting this stuff to you, that shows you how things really work. Leveraging so many different things. So that's something that maybe is in the back of Jimmy Pitaro's mind. If Paul Feinbaum's not happy, it's not so much Feinbaum, it's who represents Feinbaum, because that guy's the gatekeeper of the SEC broadcast rights, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And to your, again, like Paul really is the face of, not just SEC Network, but I think he's the face of SEC football in many ways. It's him and Nick Saban.
Is it that way though? I mean, I was going to ask you this. Is it really that way? Is Paul Feinbaum really that popular? I'm obvious. I've been on Paul's show many times, and so I have a pretty good idea. Lived in the South 15 years, went to Georgia. I'd like to think he's really popular, but is he? You drill down.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm biased in the sense that Paul and I have a good relationship, and I've also been on his show. But I've walked around with Paul in Birmingham, Alabama, and in other Atlanta and things like that. And it is kind of amazing that, like, truly, it feels like you're walking down the street with like the biggest person in the world. Really? I mean, it's just people just pulling over their cars and like yelling at him. Like, and I think there's just something about, I think, the way that maybe he talks to him. Yes, it makes him very approachable. Very distinct. Yeah, he looks, exactly who he is. And all you have to do is yell Paul. And if he turns his head, like, oh yeah, that's him. And there's just something about him that I think people really, grab onto. And so I think that he is still the biggest, kind of message maker of SEC football. I can't really think of, and I thought when I saw Bobby's story, one of the first questions I had was like, okay, he's really the guy they've built the SEC Network so much of their program around. Like, who's the guy that steps in if Peter Paul Burns leaves? And it would be Peter probably, and I like Peter too, and I know him. I've spent some time around him, but he's still not at that Paul level yet. And so I don't think that there's necessarily that other guy other than Paul. He's really kind of owned the market down here the way that, many years ago, Mike Francesa owned New York, and some of these other people in different cities have owned their kind of areas. I still think he moves the needle more than anybody else down here, honestly.
And whether it's Peter or anybody else, I mean, what Paul has established takes 40 years. I mean, this is a guy who used to work at the Birmingham News. I mean, was a prominent columnist, was like an investigative guy. I mean, pretty good idea of his background. Very, very distinct personality and a very, very distinct look. And I just think when I watch, as a longtime radio guy myself, and I've sat in meetings so many times with consultants and management program directors, and to watch Paul do his show and do it on television too, right? And he'll go on the show, he'll open the show, and there'll be like 90 seconds of dead air. Like this, I mean, when you can do that, and he does it at one point or the other, and just the nature of the programming that's on and the callers and the devotion to that format, he always goes back to that no matter what. And this is national on ESPN. I mean, you can't be just, oh, I'm breaking news every day. Oh, I'm really upbeat, or I'm really articulate, or I'm really this, that. And it doesn't matter. You have to have time. And that's what he has that nobody else can reproduce. The question is, for me, ESPN's perfect for him. Would that play? Let me ask you one last question before I let you go, because we have another guest coming up. Sure. Here's really the essence of the question. Do you think CBS Sports Network, remember Jim Rome went over there? Well, he's still there, right? And he kind of fell off the face of the earth in terms of distribution. Jim Rome is still a great broadcaster. The show hasn't changed, but he doesn't have that distribution, so he's really not quite as prominent nationally. Of course, ESPN is a function of that too. He's not on ESPN. What do you think would happen if Feinbaum, if CBS went all in, got the rights, and they had Paul do his show there, and they didn't improve the distribution? Do you think Paul would be as popular as he is right now?
Probably not. I mean, I think that's going to be as Paul weighs whatever his next options are, whether that's, going to the Zone, as Bobby mentioned in his story, or considering other options. Like, that's the big question. And, for a long time, it's been established that when you leave ESPN, you lose relevance. And for most people, it has been. You've had your exceptions. Dan Patrick, seems like Colin has done very well. Skip Bayless still seems to be relevant. But for most other people, they go and then they kind of disappear. I think Paul's a little unique in that he's kind of carried his audience from every place. And so, whether it would work as a TV show, I'm not sure. But I think he's always going to want to have that radio component. And so it worked when it was just based in Birmingham. It worked when he did Sirius. It's worked kind of when he's gone more national now. And so I think he kind of has that in his back pocket that he can kind of take that wherever he goes. But certainly, not that SC Network is doing huge ratings, but there are more people down here that are going to know how to find that than CBS Sportsnet or something like that. And so, ESPN is constantly putting Paul on their shows, whether it's Get Up or College Football Live. And that's why, he's always flying up to Bristol, New York to go on the shows. And so you would lose those kind of bumps in prominence and your opportunity to kind of have something go viral or kind of get some movement on social. I don't see anything at CBS Sportsnet that does that at this point. And so that would be the fear, I think, if I was Paul, and to consider that option.
Great conversation. I hope to have you back and talk more about this stuff. I can't thank you enough, John. Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
That's the senior sports editor of AL.com, John Talty, Jay Talty on Twitter. And we've got John McClain with us now. Eminent, and I do mean eminent, sports media, sports journalism. When it comes to sports journalism, it doesn't get any more prominent, venerable, legendary than John McClain. And it's an honor to have him on the show and get his insight on what's going on in the state of Texas. Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate the time. It's an honor to have you.
It's my pleasure. Been a big fan. I'm sorry I don't look better, but hey, I got a face for radio.
Well, so do I. And we're just happy to have you. So, and you got so much. I mean, you talk about just in general, a guy who's been in Houston for a long time. And I know you're a national guy too, but in Houston, can you remember a period like this? And maybe there is a period where Houston was more prominent nationally on the sports map year round.
It's never been, Brooks. I've been here since 1976, been covering the NFL since 1977. We've never had it where all three of our teams were good. They all have stars. They're all in the news. Astros, of course, lose the World Series. Now they're involved in controversy over their cheating scandal. The Rockets with Harden and Westbrook, people love watching them. And the Texans coming off victories over Indianapolis and New England, lead the AFC South. We've had times when two were good, but never three. And as you can imagine, fans here, there's quite a buzz.
Speaking of buzz, we've had some people on from Boston and New England this week, and they've been buzzing about Bill O'Brien. They've been buzzing about that dynamic, that relationship between Belichick, O'Brien, and the two organizations, and what played out last offseason that may impact the front offices, perhaps, of both teams. Describe what your understanding is of that relationship between the Texans and the Patriots, O'Brien and Belichick.
First of all, Brooks, when they tried to hire Nick Caserio, if he had come to Houston, Bill O'Brien would still be in charge of personnel. Bill O'Brien is their general manager without the title, like Bill Belichick, Sean Payton, John Gruden, Andy Reid, Pete Carroll. And he has made a lot of moves there, and he was criticized at the time. But in retrospect, almost every move he made has turned out to be good at this point of the season. Now, I still believe they're going after Caserio when his contract expires in May. It's going to be hard for him to get a job as a general manager with another team when his contract doesn't expire till after the draft. Maybe Belichick will let him go early, but he didn't last year. And one reason, Caserio also helps coach quarterbacks, but he's tight with O'Brien. Jack Easterby, who'd been there the last 6 years, who's here, is O'Brien's right-hand man. and is getting more and more influence in the organization. He's really tight with Nick Caserio as well. The tampering that they filed was because of Easterby, not O'Brien. Then, of course, they dropped the charges. So since Caserio's not signed an extension, Brooks, I think he's gone. It's just a matter of where. And I know they still want him. But even if he comes there, Bill O'Brien is still going to be in charge of personnel. He will be in charge of personnel as long as he's here. Even when they had other general managers, the last one, Brian Gaine, he didn't bring in a player that O'Brien didn't sign off on because O'Brien has in his contract that he plays who he wants. He's in charge of the game day roster. So if you give him players he doesn't want, he doesn't have to play them. So they have a dynamic here where he still has a good relationship with the Patriots. But now, for the first time, he doesn't have to call Bill Belichick daddy.
Well, does that situation for Bill O'Brien stem from the relationship with ownership? I mean, what are the specifics of that? Why does O'Brien have that kind of authority?
Cal McNair, who his mother, Janice, is the controlling owner, but Cal, her oldest son, runs the organization. And O'Brien talked Cal McNair into hiring Jack Easterby. I can't remember his executive title, but the fact is he's like the assistant general manager. And he is everything is run by him. O'Brien trusts him. And so Cal McNair, they talked him into giving O'Brien control so far, being 8-4, coming off the victory over New England, bouncing back from being humiliated 41-7 at Baltimore with victories over the Colts and the Patriots. I'm sure Cal McNair, the owner, likes the current setup, and I guarantee you Bill O'Brien is not giving up his authority.
Visiting with John McClain. He covers the NFL for the Houston Chronicle, longtime columnist. And also you can hear him on Sports Radio 610 in Houston, 104.5 The Zone in Nashville. And it's amazing. I'm talking to you and I'm learning more about the Texans that I've known, right? And the national
probably more than you want.
Well, not necessarily. This is great information, and it's stunning because of the way the national media treats the Texans, treats O'Brien. You would think Bill O'Brien has one foot out the door and that he is out of favor, but throughout his tenure, when they've struggled and they've had profound struggles, he's still been in a position to do his job and, as you say, control talent. What's your assessment? What do you really think of Bill O'Brien, when it comes to coaching? I mean, what's your thought on him as a coach?
O'Brien didn't just learn from Bill Belichick. He learned from George O'Leary, Ralph Friedgen. Of all the former Belichick proteges, he's the only one that's been successful. Now, Brian Flores has still got time. Matt Patricia.
Charlie Weiss in there, too.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of them that have failed, including Romeo Crennel, the defensive coordinator here. But, Brooks, Bill's an offensive coach. He oversees the game plan. He coaches Deshaun Watson a lot. Watson loves the guy. Fans there don't like O'Brien. I don't know if it's all of his news conferences are televised live on their website, and fans don't like the way he is with us. And doesn't bother me at all. I think he does a good job. Give me O'Brien's answers in news conferences way over Bill Belichick. And O'Brien's moody, but I think he knows what he's doing on offense. He's had clock management issues. Every head coach does. Play callers who are in charge of clock management have most problems. O'Brien goes ballistic when people criticize his clock management. We haven't had to do it much this year, but he knows quarterbacks, he knows offense. And one thing I've noticed, Brooks, the more wrong he is, the more adamant that he's going to be right. That's that stubborn streak. He's incredibly competitive. So far, he's done a good job over personnel. He's rebuilt the offensive line, brought in 2 new running backs, brought in new tight end, and he brought in Kenny Stills, and they brought in some defensive players. And so it's hard to be critical of him as a general manager at this point. And but people here, every time he loses a game, they want him gone. I do a mailbag, Brooks, every Friday, and when they lose, it's just stacked with people wanting O'Brien out of town. And then when they win a game like New England, they don't fire off anything. but he's not going anywhere. This is the first year of a 4-year extension he signed under the late owner Bob McNair. So he would have to have 2 terrible years in a row before he'd lose his job. And as long as Deshaun Watson's healthy, they're not going to have 2 bad years in a row.
So that job security, because I remember Bill O'Brien was dead man walking in the national media, right? Doesn't necessarily mean he was dead man walking. So what you're really saying here, it's a function of the McNair family, and they're going to give him a hell of a lot of rope, a lot more rope than people realize.
O'Brien, this family, now they're not Mike Brown, but they have been, Bob McNair's MO was to be very patient. He would give people a lot of rope, and if they hung themselves, he'd get rid of them. But he was patient with Gary Kubiak, who lasted all but the last 3 games of the 8th season. Dom Capers, the first coach, lasted 4. Kubiak and Capers were fired, only 214 records in franchise history. And I'll tell you something, Brooks, I've said this on the show and on my radio shows, and I've written it. And I never said this with any other quarterback that I covered with the Oilers or the Texans. I believe the Texans will win a Super Bowl with Deshaun Watson, maybe more than one. I don't know who the head coach will be, but that's how highly I think of Watson.
You take Watson over Warren Moon in his heyday with the Oilers.
I covered every game and every practice Warren Moon had.
Wow.
And I never said I thought they were going to win a Super Bowl with that team. And the reason was they had great talent, much better talent. There were years, Brooks, in probably 92 and 93, their talent was second to none. But they weren't a cohesive team. They were a team of individuals. They didn't have leadership like you need to win a championship. And it was a shame because they were talented, great guys. But I never thought that team was going to win a Super Bowl. And then the teams with Bum Phillips, I never thought they'd win a Super Bowl because they had to get through Pittsburgh. And the steel curtain of the 70s is still as good a dynasty as I've ever seen.
I just remember that kick the door in. I remember that kick the door in every single year from Bum Phillips.
Kick the SOB in.
Yeah, that's what it was, actually.
Last year we knocked on the door. This year we beat on the door. Next year we're going to kick the son of a bitch.
Right. And it's I don't know if it's a similar situation, but the next thing I wanted to talk to you about, we're visiting with John McClain of the Houston Chronicle, sports radio all over the place. Let's switch now to the Cowboys, and part of what you just described, I think, is happening with the Cowboys. But I think this is a really extraordinary situation that a lot of people, this is my opinion, might be missing, that it's not really Jason Garrett anymore. I mean, it's always been Jerry Jones. Since Jimmy Johnson, it has been Jerry Jones. I mean, is there going to be a resolution of this situation where you get a coach in there who's a real coach?
They hired Bill Parcells because they needed a win, get a stadium.
Oh, right. There you go. You just,
and they haven't done it since. Now, right. A friend of mine who's been a diehard Cowboy fan his whole life said if Jimmy Johnson was coaching his team, where would they be? I said they'd be a Super Bowl contender. Right. And I thought this last week and this week, Jerry Jones is doing the team a disservice. He's creating a huge distraction by talking about the coaches twice a week. So then the media goes to the players, talk to the players about it. It's all over the media because Jerry should just say, we will evaluate Jason Garrett after the season. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. And then he's not going to disappear because he's Jerry Jones. But don't talk about it because, Brooks, you've been doing this a long time. Players worry. Head coach is out. Then the coordinators are probably out. Position coaches are out. Am I going to be out? Right. And that's not what you want when you're trying to win a division, even one as bad as the NFC East. So the key is, who is going to take a job with an owner as a general manager and his son, Steven, who will be in the same role when Jerry's gone. And I know they love Lincoln Riley. Does Lincoln Riley want to leave OU to come to the NFL? And if so, he's a Texan. Would he want to coach the Cowboys with that setup and not having control? I don't know if he would or not, but it's going to be hard to get a big-time coach. They may get lucky with somebody, but coaches don't like an owner and a general manager, especially a guy. And Jerry played football in college, and he considers himself a football guy. But a guy who's not an expert at personnel, if you're going to take orders from him, that's one thing. But doing it from an owner whose track record has not been good for working with those coaches. So I don't know what they're going to do. They got talent. They should be so much better. Letting Mitchell Trubisky account for 4 touchdowns, that's embarrassing.
Unbelievable, man. We could talk all day about the Cowboys. We have limited time with you, though, and I wanted to make sure we touched on a program that really has fascinated me for a long time, Texas A&M. They're kind of down in your neck of the woods, and I wanted to get your impressions of Jimbo Fisher, where they are right now, because I personally thought they were going to take a bigger step this year, and it really hasn't happened, even though they got an unbelievably difficult schedule this year. What's your assessment of Jimbo Fisher and what's happening in A&M?
And I thought you were going to ask me, Brooks, about my Baylor Bears, who are still playing.
Okay, we will get to them.
The Aggies are not playing. A&M made a mistake going to the SEC. They got to play LSU and Alabama. One reason I like the Big 12s, everybody plays everybody every year. It's unfair in the SEC when some schools have an easier schedule. They paid Jimbo Fisher a lot of money. Of course, they expected better results. They started well. They had some close games. And they recruit 4- and 5-star recruits every day. I read on the Houston Chronicle's website or in the paper, Aggies got a commitment from another 4- or 5-star player, while Baylor's getting all these 2- and 3-stars. And I think if A&M was still in the Big 12, it'd be a nationally ranked team every year. But they're gone. They make more money on television. But I don't see them as long as Saban is there. And now LSU is so prominent. They're not going to win that division.
Wow. What about Matt Rule at Baylor? First of all, what do you think of the Baylor Bears? Is that team for real? But also Matt Rule I know there's been rumors about him going to other places in terms of college, but what about him as an NFL coach?
Well, first of all, he done a fantastic job. Came into a terrible situation. If Matt leaves, it'll be so much better, the program, than it was when he took the job to come from Temple. And I thought, Brooks, at the time, why in the world they hiring a guy from the East? He can't recruit Texas. Right. And he comes in right away, hires all these longtime former high school coaches and the head of the High School Coaches Association to teach him. And he's gone from one win, and they play an OU in a Big 12 championship game and lost to the Sooners by 3. He's done a fantastic job. He signed an extension this year with a big buyout, but it won't surprise me at all if he doesn't go to the NFL, because after he won one game, Chris Ballard, a great GM at Indy, interviewed him. And then last year, Mike McCagnon from the Jets, who was a GM at the time, interviewed him, offered him the job, but wouldn't let him bring the coaches he wanted. And Rule turned it down. So if he's getting interviews after 1-7 victories, I would certainly expect more teams to be after him. If Doug Marrone gets fired in Jacksonville and Tom Coughlin is still there, I could see Coughlin coming after him, because Rule was on his staff a year with the Giants. The only college coach I'd worry as a Baylor alum to lose him would be if James Franklin left Penn State for some reason and Penn State came after him, because that's where he's from.
This is amazing talking to you about this, and you've got specifics. So what the hell is it about Matt Rule? I mean, he's got a nice resume. He's had one unbelievable, let's face it, it's an unbelievable turnaround at Baylor, but what is it about that guy that he's getting those kinds of looks from those prominent people?
After they hired him, Brooks, I was in Waco before a game, and I asked the AD, I said, I'd like to meet him. So I went to his office, and I took 3 friends of mine who were going to the game, all Baylor alums, media guys. And so I just sit there and listen to him. And when I left, I told him, and this is before he coached, I said, man, that guy's impressive. And Matt's 44, I believe, but he can act like he's 20, and everything that comes out of his mouth, Brooks, is good. He also is great with the media. He understands the importance of the media. He was at the Combine to see a couple of his Baylor players and Temple players, and I saw him being interviewed by the NFL Network, and I texted him. I said, don't leave. I need to come talk to you, because I can't write about him college because I don't cover college. But it was the Combine, so he gets it. And so many coaches are so paranoid, and they treat us like we've got leprosy. But Matt's always embraced the media. He's not scared of the New York media. So he runs a pro-style offense. So people see that, and they think he's pro-ready. But and if he leaves, I'll wish him the very best, He succeeded at Temple and Baylor. There would be no reason if he made the right move to get the right owner and go where there's a quarterback, he couldn't succeed in the NFL as well.
I want to ask you one more question. It's kind of in your sweet spot, I think. And this is a question I think a lot of people, I've heard people speculate about this. It's been in my mind. And you talked about what a special player Deshaun Watson is and the concern. There's a lot of concern that people have voiced over the years. And maybe it's just a function of not liking O'Brien, but there's a concern he's running too much. He's getting hit too much. It's shortening his career. We may be seeing another Cam Newton situation playing out. What do you think of Bill O'Brien and how he's running that offense? And do you think it could shorten the career of Watson in terms of Watson having to do too much improvisation?
Watson doesn't run nearly as much as he did. And I wrote a column about this yesterday and broke it all down. He's running less. He's running for less yards. And the reason is his protection has improved, adding Laramie Tunsil at left tackle, first and second round picks at right tackle and left guard. Has helped improve the pass protection. So he has more confidence in it, so he's not bailing out. He's not having to take off as much. Plus, he's a smarter runner. He only missed one play last year. That's because he thought the halftime was over, and he hasn't. They took him out of a blowout this year and put in A.J. McCarron briefly at the end. But he's a tough kid. He proved it last year, played with a collapsed lung and a broken rib. But he's getting hit less and less. He got hit 4 times by the Patriots, great defense. The Texans' defense, mediocre at best, knocked down Brady 12 times without J.J. Watt. So they've done a better job of that. They don't have a lot of design runs. Now, when you pitch the ball and have DeAndre Hopkins throw him a touchdown pass, which he dives into the end zone for a 6-yard touchdown, yeah, that's a great trick play and everything. But I would never call that because it just exposes Watson to more hits. He was able to avoid it. But he's nothing like Lamar Jackson, who runs by design.
What's your thought on Holgorsen?
I thought Dana Holgorsen would do a better job here in his first year. He had a really good quarterback, Derek King, who's sitting out, says he'll be back. We all expect him to transfer. But Dana's done too well. I told him I'm glad he's gone from West Virginia because he beat the heck out of Baylor every other year. So I think next year when he has another recruiting class and he can get the quarterback he wants, I believe he will help the University of Houston get back to prominence because they've been awful this season.
So do you really think they're going to be able to hang on to Matt Rule? If there's not an NFL, you brought that up and talking about who he's interviewing with, and he's at Baylor. It sounds like to me, you're saying at Baylor, this is really a turning point for the Baylor program, and that this could be an extended elite program with Rule there, and that Rule will stay there. Is that what you're saying?
I think he'll stay there unless a good NFL job opens up, or if James Franklin were to leave Penn State, which there's not possible of that this year. I think those are the only things he would do. I think he'll do what Art Browse did. Art Browse took over a terrible team, made him into a nationally prominent team before he got run. And Rule has done that so much quicker than Browse. I think he's got a program built to stay. And like Browse, his last recruiting class was his best. Then they all got to go to other schools. Only one player stayed, which is also even more remarkable about Rule. Right now, Rule has recruited his best class for next season. So, yes, I think Baylor is going to, and I say nationally prominent. I'm not talking about competing for the national championship. I'm talking about, being right there with Oklahoma in the Big 12, maybe Texas, based on the Longhorns. What a disappointment they've been. But yes, I believe that. But I also think Penn State could get him, and I also think the NFL could get him.
Is Tom Herman in trouble?
Not this year. Texas is a hard place to coach, Brooks. Those alums, they're so lived. I did a program this week with Vince Young, and at an event where I interviewed him for an hour, reliving the 06 championship game against USC. There were a lot of Longhorn fans in there. And I'm thinking, boy, it's been a long time now since you guys won consistently. Herman did a great job at Houston. I thought last year they turned the corner. As a Baylor fan, I'm like, whoa, Texas is going to be back. And then they've been mediocre this season despite recruiting 4- and 5-star players every year. They used to call Mac Brown Coach February until he won a national championship and then lost the other one to Alabama when Colt McCoy got hurt. But it is ridiculous, Brooks, for the University of Texas with more money than Fort Knox in a great city like Austin is not a top 5 program like Ohio State and Clemson and other programs are Alabama every year. And there's not a Texas alum that doesn't believe that. And I don't even like them because I grew up in Waco as a Baylor fan. But Texas should be a nationally prominent program, but they can't get it right.
You must be in heaven right now, because I remember Grant Taft, and when they would have once in a while, you'd have some big wins here and there. But are you with the stadium, college game day? That must have been kind of surreal for you, wasn't it?
As somebody who grew up in Waco, my first Baylor game was 1960 when I was a Cub Scout, and they beat Colorado, and I was sold on them. To see the building that's gone on there, the money they've pumped in, they pay a lot of money. Browse was going to make $7 million a year in his last year. That's just his base salary. They're paying Matt Rule a lot of money. The alums kick in the money, Brooks, and the administration is pro sports as well, and the facilities are fabulous. But and being centrally located where Baylor is in the state of Texas, they're getting more players. But when Rule came in that first year, he started with nothing. And now he's recruiting well. But you mentioned heaven, yeah. Every Baylor fan I know out there right now is in heaven, and many of them think they're going to beat Oklahoma. And I like to think, like Vince Young said in our program we did 2 nights ago, he looked at his watch and he goes, "It's 7:05 and OU still sucks."
Well, man, this has really made my week. It's been an unbelievable visit. I hope we can come back and do this thing. I've learned more about what the hell's going on in this 20, 30 minutes than I have the whole season. So I can't thank you enough. Thanks so much, John.
Hey, Brooks, well, next time let's talk about the Astros. I've been an Astro fan since '62, and there's a lot going on with the Astros. No.
Totally, we're going to. It doesn't even need to bubble up, but I do want to cover that. So we'll do this in the next few weeks, okay?
My pleasure, Brooks. Happy holidays. Thank you.
You too. That's John McClain of the Houston Chronicle, and of course does sports radio. Outstanding. That was unbelievable because of all the specific information that you get. That guy is the best. And that's the way I think all of us should be in sports media. Somebody who has been around as long as he has, but clearly doesn't rest on his laurels. Wow. That was unbelievable. I mean, to find out that stuff about Matt Rule, to find out the specifics about Bill O'Brien. Now, why am I acting like this? Wait a minute, Brooks. This is just an interview. Calm down. Here's why. All right. I'm not in Houston. I don't cover the Texans every day. I've talked to people from Houston, had them on this show, not to denigrate those people. And I'm not saying they don't know, but I don't know about you. In the last 2 years, Bill O'Brien, there was a point where I think it was the beginning of this season where literally I remember listening to podcasts, prominent podcasts, where they would run down who's the first coach who's going to get fired this season. And Bill O'Brien topped the list. So now come to find out, after all of the struggles of the Texans and seemingly a team that's not that well coached, at least at times, I'm not saying they are. Very inconsistent at times. Watson taking too many hits at times. The Clowney trade. There's a lot of things out there you can point to about O'Brien. But now we know O'Brien, no matter what, is going to be running personnel. That's how it works there. That's number one. And number two, the McNair family is devoted to them, and they've got a track record to that extent. Not because they love him, but they have given other coaches, lengthy periods. Capers got 4 years, but before him, Kubiak got 8 years. So where's O'Brien? 5? And so now what's happening really kind of makes sense. And now the personnel is getting better on the offensive line. So I want to, I know some people from SC, and it's funny, he brings up Vince Young. If you're an SC fan, you're watching this. I was at that game at the Rose Bowl covering the USC game. I was on the broadcast, pre and post, and did the talk shows and all that stuff on the SEC flagship for a few years. You may remember me. I did some of Petros's first shows when he started doing post-game shows for the SEC football broadcast with Arbo. We did shows back then with Mark Carrier. I believe I did. Actually, he was my partner for post-game. But so I want to bring up the Texas offensive coordinator situation. I bring that up in relation to USC because USC is going to lose Graham Harrell for better, for worse. And we debated earlier in the show how much of the consistency on offense that USC has had this year, how much of that was Harrell. I think it's safe to conclude it was not Helton. It was either Harrell or the talent. And all of those scenarios are really a condemnation of Helton. Every scenario, because we know it's not Helton because of his track record coaching offense. All right. So that's number one. There's no way around that. Just look at the season before this one. And they were wildly, ridiculously inconsistent. Right. So that's that. Now let's look at the quarterbacks. Right. You've got JT Daniels, the anointed one from Helton. Right. And I know he got hurt, so we didn't really see him in this offense. But the year before, Daniels was pedestrian. There's no way around that. True freshman, understandable, shouldn't be starting anyway. That's a problem with your program. When you have a starting true freshman, SC should never have a starting true freshman at any position, for the most part, especially quarterback. That's a condemnation of the program. But Helton clearly is not a good judge of talent. We know what happened with Sears, right? We know how he's run people off, Helton. And I'm not saying he's a bad guy running people off, gray shirting like Nick Saban, but we know there's a stampede to the transfer portal and that they've got a horrible recruiting class this year. But his quarterback last year didn't do much, and it was a very bad year. This year, the quarterbacks that he had buried, Slovis, what did he do? What did Matt Fink do? Great. They did great. Well, those aren't Helton's guys. Where were they? Right? Now we've got Graham Harrell there, and you have to believe that Harrell played a role, because in a vacuum, you're telling me that Slovis, let's say Harrell's not there this year with SC, right? Choreographing the offense. We know Daniels has been pedestrian, and that's Helton's guy. And Helton had buried Slovis. Right? So you're telling me that the guy that Helton had buried, Slovis, that he was forced to go to, had no choice, and Matt Fink, both guys about to transfer, right? They're that much better than Daniels and consistent in the way that they were this year. That was all them. We know it wasn't Helton because of his track record. You know, Sam Darnold single-handedly saved his job. But that's why I think losing Harrell is a huge blow to the USC offense. And one more reason that Carol Folt is screwing up. She's screwing up. There's no way around it. And I'm going to talk about SC. We have a little time here, I think, for our next guest. But let's talk about the Texas situation, because I mentioned it on Twitter before the show. What I've learned is Graham Harrell, that guy, Texas Tech guy, of course, Texas guy, and now a hot coach because of the way that SC has performed on offense. Well, I told you a couple of days before it came out, and was reported in the media, mainstream media, that Harrell had interviewed for 2 head coaching positions. I told you that earlier this week on this show. And you got to come on to this show to find these things out. And I'm not going to announce them all on Twitter, because if other information I'm going to go into today, that I'm not going to roll everything out on Twitter. Twitter is not the center of my universe. Okay. This show is. So honest to God, social media is overrated, but that's a whole nother thing. So Harrell interviewed for 2 head coaching jobs. One of them's Texas San Antonio. That's now been reported. after I reported it here. I found out this morning from a very good source that Harrell is not going to take, he's not going to take the offensive coordinator job at Texas. That's not happening. That's not a guess. It's not a guess. And that would indicate that he's, and then I talked to another source, a different source disconnected with my first source, another very good source who I trust, who said Harrell's all in on Texas San Antonio. Now, that may have broken while I've been on the air. If you see anything on that, our producer, Cam Smith, if you see anything on this, these are the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about every day, that we do talk about every day on this show. But, you know, one of the things that I've been told in the past was by another source that Herman and Harrell weren't on the best of terms. So for what it's worth, you know, it's not going to happen at Texas for Graham Harrell as offensive coordinator. And you really wonder what's going to happen to that program under Tom Herman. It really looks like Herman, I just go back to the headbutting episode. I can't get around that. And I think that when you have a coach doing that, that's a really bad sign. That's not a head coach. That's an assistant coach. Okay? If it's an assistant coach, ha, 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 right? But a head coach, when I see episodes like that, you know who it reminds me of? It reminds me of another Urban Meyer protege, DJ Durkin, guy at Maryland, the disgraced coach at Maryland. DJ Durkin was an assistant and was mentored by Urban Meyer, right? And I remember reading articles and talking to people about Durkin. And Durkin was well known for headbutting players during practice. This is in profiles about him in magazines. Headbutting players in practice as an assistant coach under Urban Meyer without a helmet on, just like Herman did. And I can't get DJ Durkin's name out of my head when I saw Herman do that before the Baylor game. And boy, it was fascinating to hear John McClain, if anybody would know about Matt Rule and how the NFL is all over him. All over him. It just goes to show you. I mean, I've heard a little bit here and there about where Rule has interviewed, but he was very specific about where he could end up. Jacksonville was a place that could be a landing spot for Matt Rule. I just can't imagine that Baylor's going to hang on to him. Maybe times have changed. Clearly, you got a lot of money. When you build a stadium at Baylor and you're right there in the middle of Texas, in the middle of football country, if there ever was high school football country, it's right there. Great location, but they didn't have a great stadium for years and years and years. And for them to build that stadium, make that commitment, it tells you about the amount of money they have, and that's critical. It's crucial. Having those whale donors for coaching salaries and buyouts. And so as far as SC goes, I did talk to a couple of sources at length last night, trying to get a handle on what's going on, because really nobody had. And I'm going to tell you straight what's going on. If you're an SC fan, don't go anywhere. You want to, and we don't have we're not going to go to a commercial. That's the great thing about Fancred and this show. No commercials. We don't have you very long. We're not on that long. You got to come in here at noon. We're not here that long, but we're here every day. And don't hang on my Twitter thinking, well, that's what Brooks is going to tell. No. Things come up, things break, but we have information every day about everything. We have great guests like John. Coming up, we've got an unbelievable guest on the college football playoff rankings, who's going to make sense of this weekend and tell you what's going to happen, period, because he's analytics and he has cracked the code to the CFP. And ESPN, this is not conspiracy. ESPN's not in the business of trying to really figure out what's going to happen. They want to get it out there, that show, and promote it and get people to watch and engender debate. Fine. That's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in who's actually in, what's actually going to happen. You know, if you follow this show, you know the only reason Tua played against Mississippi State was Alabama was forced into a position with its crap schedule to have to play or to have to run the score up on opponents. That's why he played, period. I haven't heard one person say that in the media. Not one. Instead, they say, do we have the right to criticize Nick Saban? That's what they say. And then Tua's going to go back to Alabama? Holy, what a disaster. SC, though, here's what I've determined. After talking to a couple of different people for well over an hour last night, Carol Folt is in charge. The end. It's Carol Folt's decision. And there was another coach involved in this situation at SC that tells me it was absolutely Carol Folt's decision. All right. Number one, I really find it hard to believe, ultimately, that the buyout was an issue. Okay. Even though there's a chance it could be, and it's an enormous amount of money, I really can't believe. I just can't believe, especially in the context of a school like USC, which is so flush and is run by billionaires on its board of trust. I'm not buying it. I'm just not. So you've got a new president, Carol Folt. We've talked about it ad nauseum, but it's important. She's trying to clean up the image of USC. And unfortunately, for the people who lead the school, the trustees, the people who, this is a private school, okay? It's a private school. Doesn't mean they don't get state, federal funding, but it's private. That's important to know. So money rules USC. And if you're in a position of leadership, you've got money. That's why the buyout thing, I think, is a red herring, right? Well, those people are facing an existential crisis because of the scandals going on at USC you may not be aware of, but they have been forced into situations because of ex-faculty members, ex-administrators to pay out on the order of over $1 billion with a B, over $1 billion in payments because of damages stemming from civil trials. All right. That's what's going on at SC. It's a total disaster. On top of that, the cherry on top, now the Rick Singer thing comes up, and you've got the biggest college admissions scandal in United States history, according to the Department of Justice, and it's centered at USC. That takes place after all these other things are underway, and they're still underway. It's a nightmare, right? And so USC is literally facing this sort of existential crisis, at least in the context of taking the school down a peg, and not necessarily the school. So what do? They bring in those people running the school, the prominent donors and trustee. I mean, it's the same thing. Those are the people on the board of trustees. They run the school, period. And that's why you've had this country club in the athletic department bringing in people who have no experience, prominent SC people. And that's why Rick Singer happened, the college admission scandal guy, because he was able to creep in because you did not have a real athletic director or a real athletic department. Pat Hayden was the guy who hired and promoted into an unaccountable prominent spot Donna Heinel. And it was Donna Heinel who was the mastermind at USC for the college admissions scandal. The other thing about that situation is I know the football team was involved. The football team has been mentioned in some of the indictments, but clearly the DOJ and the FBI, and I mean this literally because I've covered this and written stories about it and uncovered people who they've been covering for. But clearly the DOJ has covered up the names of the people in the USC football program who have been involved in this situation at SC. I'm guaranteeing you that's what's happening. I know it is. Because the football team has been cited in these indictments. Okay, well then who? No names, right? So for all, and I'm not saying Helton is responsible, accountable, culpable. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that the football team is intertwined and nobody's mentioning that. And who knows if there's going to be another shoe to drop? Who knows if somebody who's been charged with crimes like a Donna Heinel, who's facing decades in prison, she's facing decades in prison. This is the athletic department administrator who is the mastermind in manipulating the situation, right? If the football team is included in the indictments, then Donna Heinel had something to do with that. What if she decides to sing? So that's one more thing to think about, right? But when you're trying to understand why Clay Helton would be back, the media loves Clay Helton. I don't give a damn about that. SC fans don't give a damn about it. Nobody gives a damn about it, apparently, except for Carol Folt. She likes Clay Helton. Everybody likes him. Fine. Great. You know, Jack Sears doesn't like him. But so what I've been trying to figure out is who's really running things with the football program. Is Rick Caruso still in charge? Is Wayne Hughes, the whale donor, still in charge? Because it's Wayne Hughes is the guy who put Lynn Swann in as athletic director, his guy. They're not. We've now determined that. I determined it based on the new rules applying to membership of the Board of Trustees. Remember, we told you, Carol Folt, this new president from the University of North Carolina, she was brought in to clean things up. She has cleaned things up on the administrative side. She's fired everybody, replaced everybody as much as you can, trying to get to the root of the problems that caused those civil lawsuits. And now she's doing the same thing with the athletic department. She brings in a guy who has a good reputation, Mike Bone, who's not going to be making any decisions as to who the coach is anytime soon. Mike Bone's not involved in any of this in terms of who is going to be the coach, period. If it was up to Mike Bone, Urban Meyer would be the coach or James Franklin would be the coach. But I can tell you that Carol Folt was actively involved in the search for the coach, in the search. And it makes you wonder if she was ever really serious about hiring a coach. I mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, there's no argument that justifies keeping Helton. None. I've laid out several of them here. I just laid out a few of them. And now they're going to lose Harrell. And their recruiting class is awful. Right? It would take a miracle for them to come up to something even approaching a typical USC class. We've got less than 2 weeks till signing day. All right? So one of the big reasons why you had a decent season this year, decent, it wasn't that great. You lost to BYU. All right? BYU is the offense. Right? Well, that just walked out the door with Graham Harrell. So clearly you don't have a staff that is recruiting well. Clearly you don't have anybody on the staff that you can go to in terms of the offense. That's right now, right? You've got issues. And it's been a long time and you're not going to let him go. And you're telling me the buyout is a problem. I don't believe it for 1 second. I truly believe this was Carol Folt saying, we've got a guy who's not controversial. We can count on him not screwing things up off the field. We're winning enough, period. Right? Doesn't matter if James Franklin wants the job. Doesn't matter, I might add, that James Franklin is an African-American, which is something that the prominent USC alumni has voiced. Not that they have to hire a black coach, but that's something that's there, and it should be there. To be the first African-American head football coach at SC, that needs to happen. it statistically needs to happen sooner than later. And Franklin could have been that guy. And there was another guy, one last guy. We're going to go to a guest. Actually, there was another coach who was heavily involved besides Franklin for this job. I'll tell you who it is. But first, we've got a very important guest to get to. Obviously, the college football professor. Once again, Adam McClintock is joining us to talk about the college football playoffs. No better person right now, literally, to talk about, because he's somebody, and you can go ahead and bring him up when you get a chance, Cam. He's somebody who's going to tell you what you really care about most. Who's actually going to be in the college football playoff? Because that's a moving target. So we're going to be joined here shortly by Adam McClintock. He's at CFB_professor, and he is co-founder of Matrix Analytical, and he has a Patron account. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I don't know how many times I need to say it, Patron, to get it right. I just know the tequila Patron, and it's spelled the same way. So, not that I'm a big fan of tequila. I'm really not. But so, Adam, thanks again, man, for taking the time. I appreciate it. Do we have Adam with us?
No problem at all.
Thank you so much. And so you guys upgrade. It looks like you upgraded the decoration since the last time we saw you a couple of weeks ago. The Christmas decoration.
Yeah, I told you she loves the holidays. She loves the holidays, man. So
that's awesome, man. I like it. We need to do that here. Spruce things up. So as we go into the college football playoffs, just I know you've been thinking about this, discussing it. What are your thoughts going in? What are the things you're really watching for as we go into the weekend?
Well, honestly, the things I'm really looking towards, as far as the whole Utah versus Oklahoma argument, is my projection actually had Oklahoma jumping Utah this last week, but it was I thought that the projection had Oklahoma's top 25 wins and their strength of schedule difference between them and Utah being just enough to really overcome that game control element, the gap between the two, to make that leap. Now, it was on knife's edge. I wasn't surprised it went either way, but it did have Oklahoma jumping Utah. Now, what I'm looking for this weekend, if Oklahoma wants to get in, they need to really come out and be impressive against Baylor from kick to finish. They can't do this thing where they get up by 20 points and then let the opposition back in the game, or they can't get down like they did last time. Utah also has to have a close game with Oregon in order for any of this to matter as well. That has to happen in order for the door for Oklahoma to be open. And then Georgia could really throw a wrench into all this if they come out LSU this weekend. Then none of this matters because the SEC gets two teams in. So,
what about Baylor?
Baylor, they're in a position where their strength of schedule isn't good enough really to get them in. It would take a Utah loss for Baylor to get in. Utah loss and Baylor beating Oklahoma. Baylor's kind of at that kind of odd man out spot right now where they really don't have a clear path to get in there if Utah wins. So if you're a Baylor Bears fan, you're a big Ducks fan tonight because you're not getting into the playoff if Utah wins. Unless you pull a Ohio State from 2014, you go out and you beat them up 59-0, which I don't think anybody sees that coming. But that's only why I see Baylor being in.
Visiting with Adam McClintock. He's the college football professor, CFB_professor on Twitter. So let's try to drill down. This is probably really unfair, but let's say Utah beats Oregon in a tight game. How many points does Oklahoma have to beat Baylor by to get in and to jump Utah? And how many points would Baylor have to beat Oklahoma by to jump Utah if Utah wins a tight game with Oregon?
Mm-hmm. With Oklahoma, if Oklahoma comes out and beats Baylor by, let's say 20, that should be enough to get, and say Utah wins by field goal. Okay. In order to pull those game control elements closer together. Currently, right now, Utah has the 5th best game control in the college football poll, right? Oklahoma's at 11. The problem with that is that they both their schedules, either one of their schedules is impressive. They're both in the 80s to 100 range, okay? So the committee, if the committee doesn't mind if you're playing that type of schedule, but if you do, you need to really be controlling it from whistle to whistle. And Oklahoma really hasn't done that so much this year as Utah has, especially the past 5 weeks or so. So Oklahoma is going to need to come out and really put it on Baylor in order to have a chance in this thing. If Utah comes out and beats Oregon by 2 touchdowns, I think if you're a Sooners fan, you can probably just sit back and have fun watching the game, but understand that your playoff hopes are pretty limited.
So what about Oklahoma State still being in the top 25? Do you think that was a deliberate thing done by the committee to try to aid Oklahoma and the Big 12 to still have a shot to get into the playoff? I mean, what's your thought on Oklahoma State being there, despite the fact that Oklahoma State and Kansas State both not in the coaches or AP poll?
There could be a little bit of that. The Oklahoma State actually projected at 26. They were side looking in for my projection. So I wasn't that surprised that they sneaked in. I was more surprised Kansas State wasn't in. Kansas State, if anybody had a gripe this past weekend with the rankings, it was Kansas State, and it was the Big 12 with Kansas State, not with Oklahoma being 6. Kansas State projected at 21st. Resume to USC, and so that really Oklahoma and their argument against Utah because they're looking at the losses. Okay, Utah lost to an 8-4, number 22 ranked USC, while came in and lost to a 8-4 unranked Kansas State team. Now, if they would have fallen where they were projected to fall, 2021 or 22, then you're saying, okay, well, the losses wash out, they're equal. But now you can't say that. So that just gives the committee is kind of putting themselves in a position where they have an out either way. So, you kind of understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally. And I see that they were able to get cover from the AP and the coaches poll, having USC in the top 25 already. And so then they put in a Big 12 team in Oklahoma State. And as you said, it could have been Kansas State. So that makes perfect sense. So now they're accounting for both conferences. But, I mean, what's your thought about and you mentioned Kansas State. What teams, let's say, that are more up in the rankings, higher ranked, is the biggest variance that you see from what you think they should be at, as opposed to based on your statistical algorithm? What is the biggest variance from the prominent teams that you see compared to what they're actually where they're actually ranked in the CFP?
I think the biggest variance was really only about two spots. And that was Alabama. I had Alabama projected at 10, and they ended up 12. So really, everybody projected pretty much right on as far as from about like I said, 21 up for Kansas State to be. So there weren't any major surprises. Alabama would probably be the closest thing you could call a surprise, but they're not really that surprising at 12. There can be really, I know that it wants to be one way or another with the committee, if there is bias, and there is a bias, but it's self-inflicted by the conferences by the way they schedule.
Right. Do we still have Adam with us? I think we may have lost Adam. Adam McClintock of Matrix Analytical, and you can go to his Patron. If you just go to his Twitter, I was going to mention this before I think Adam's with us, so we'll keep going with him. So, Adam, I want to mention before we let you go, I know you got to go, so how do people go to your Patron? Because if people want to know, coming out of all of the games of the weekend, who's going to get in, you're the first guy where you can really know, and people can find that out, right? They can go to your Patron. How can they do that? How can people go there and find out? I don't think we have him, and we have another guest, I think, coming up here shortly. So we'll be going to Kevin. We're going to go down to Dallas here in a moment and talk to Kevin Turner, who's one of our friends of the show, many friends of the show. And if you're coming in late, man, you missed it today. Damn. We had the college football professor. And as I said before, go to his Twitter. It's CFB_professor. And you can go and sign up. I'm telling it to you straight. Forget about everything else out there. This guy has cracked the algorithm. He's in this business. He runs a company called Matrix Analytical. He's under the radar. And I predict at some point, you're going to see this guy, Adam McClintock, and that invariably happens with us, where we get in early with people and then they end up on ESPN or whatever it is. That's fine. It's great. And we have people from ESPN. We had Dan Orlovsky on with us today. Had Kirk Herbstreit on the show. We're going to have Herbie coming up here again soon, by the way. Lots of people. Peter Burns, friend of the show, comes on regularly. We'll try to get him on next week. I wanted to get him on after the big weekend to get his reaction response as to who makes it in, who doesn't. Peter Burns. We talked to John Talty, senior sports editor at essentially the Birmingham News, but with AL.com. Very prominent guy. And we were talking about Paul Feinbaum. And if Paul Feinbaum was to leave ESPN and the SEC network, and where would they go with that network? Who could take over? And I really don't think it would be that big of a drop off. And it would be our guy, Peter Burns, who's been on this show several times, friend of the show. Peter Burns is awesome. And he's not a typical talking head. If you follow him on Twitter, Peter Burns, you'll see that. He is a personality. He is an entrepreneur. And his life story is an amazing story. And I think he'd be great as kind of the face of, there would be no better person because, listen, I mean, I know Feinbaum has a lot of fans. He's been around forever, justifiably so. But for me, there's not much there because I think people watch him because of the built-in context, the phone calls and the personalities of the callers. If you don't know the Feinbaum show, so much of the show is built around the personalities of the callers. And so if you're not really into that, and it's very much a Southern thing, listen, I'm a Georgia graduate. I lived in the South 15 years. I worked in the state of Alabama. So I consider myself to be a Southerner. And I've listened to Paul's show many years. I've been on Paul's show several times. And it's just like when Paul said this week on Get Up on ESPN that the country doesn't want to see Utah in the college football playoff. They'd rather see Alabama. I mean, he's just, trying to get a rise out of people. And that's his MO. But there's not a lot of substance there. There has been in the past, but not so much anymore. He trades on personality, and that's what ESPN is. That's what Stephen A. Smith is. If I'm tuning into you, if I'm going to watch you, I want to get some sort of information, whether it's through an amazing guest like we had, and John Talty is an amazing guest. All three of these guys are going to give you what is essentially proprietary information that unless you're really following them and have followed them throughout their careers, you're not going to know. That's what we're aiming to do when we have people on. And when I come on, I'm talking. I mean, I'm like every morning killing myself before I come on the show because what I'm going to do today, you're not going to hear on other shows. Well, damn, that's hard to do. It's not easy and be good and make you want to come back. All I can say is, what really motivates me in doing this great show on Fancred? Fancred's the great part, by the way. Is it's almost impossible for me to watch sports media these days. It really is. I mean, SVP is one of the exceptions, I'm sure, for a lot of you. SVP and what he does is great, and it's good. I like what he does. But the daytime shows are really intolerable, insufferable. I can't watch them because I'm not learning anything. There's no information. It's all based on if you buy into these people. And I just don't. I'm not a fanboy of that. And so what we're doing is really an answer to that. It really is. It's not that we're not covering stuff, by the way, that happened last night. We absolutely are. We just cover it differently. And we get you ahead of the game with guys like Kevin Turner, who is joining us now from Dallas. And I can't think of a better guy to have on right now. Friend of the show, Kevin Turner, is joining us to talk Cowboys. And his coverage is brought to you by mybookie.ag, where, of course, mybookie.ag, if you sign up, they will double your deposit if you use the code Fancred, Fancred, Fancred. That's your code to sign up at mybookie.ag to double your deposit there. Kevin, man, I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Man, I'm happy to join you again. Just another day in paradise down here in the Metroplex after last night's awesome game.
So is that a guitar right there?
Oh, yeah.
So were you playing today? What do you play? Can you play something for us right now?
Yeah, what would you like? You know, a song about the Cowboys? See if I can reach it.
Yeah. Do you give us what could you play or what would you play in relation to the Cowboys right now?
You can't get this on the Stephen A. Smith show.
You can't, man. Forget about it. That's why we're here.
Okay, let's see. I don't know if I'm in tune here. If you would you please just give me 3 topics from last night's game, just so I have something to go off of.
3 topics. Mitch Trubisky running wild.
Okay.
Let's see. Jerry Jones, lament, and Jason Garrett being ignored by everybody on an island. Jason Garrett's on an island.
Completely freestyle, just so everyone knows. I did not plan to do this, so full disclaimer. And we will start with the E chord, and let's go. Give me one measure to get used to it.
Good.
Friday morning in Dallas, and the whole town's gone mad. Jason Garrett's gonna lose his job, and it's not gonna make anybody sad. So you can get the basic rhyme pattern. Next time I'll be prepared to have a song, but I'm a horrible singer. At some point, your audience is going, no.
It's freaking awesome, man. That is really cool.
Know me. I don't know if your complete audience is like, once he started singing, I'm good.
Dude, you know what we could do? If you give me the well, maybe we can't, but at some point I want to get to the point where we can upgrade our on my stuff, so we could run you through auto tune, so we could keep you on tune, right? So your voice doesn't matter anymore, because it doesn't matter anymore if people are off tune, right?
Yeah, normally when I do a song each year for all these celebrities and athletes who have died over the year, to like an in memoriam song. And I go to an actual recording studio for that, so they can fix my voice.
Right.
I don't know if the public knows, but all of your pop stars out there, not all of them are great singers. In fact, a large majority of them are not great classically trained singers. They can get to because the computer handles it.
You know what's also interesting is, and I don't know this for a fact, I'm assuming, I'd be willing to bet you that at concerts now, they're running the vocal through a plug-in, so it's not obvious. Where they have for each song, they probably have settings on an auto-tune plug-in that they're running the vocal through at a concert, a live show. Is that possible? You think they might be doing that?
Yeah, no, I know a little bit about this side of the business, and a lot of pop stars are getting that.
Right.
Still, your old fashioned, rock bands, or they're still playing the music and not. But there's real top 40 pop style acts are doing a lot of that, because honestly, who's questioning it? It's good, it's catchy, it's fine. There's no the crowd's not. The people who are critical of stuff like that tend to be just classic music people, who are kind of older now. Now it's like, oh, whatever. That sounds like a great song from Lizzo. And by the way, Lizzo's awesome. She is great. So.
So we've got some odds from mybookie.ag. Now to win, God, This is ugly. To win the NFC East, the Cowboys are -110. The Eagles are -130. What do you think?
The Cowboys are going to get in the playoffs. This is amazing. I don't know. Like a majority, and I would say a large majority of this fan base does not want the team to go to the playoffs and does not want them to win the division as of right now. Now, maybe next Wednesday, maybe after they've healed up from what happened last night, maybe they'll be like, oh yeah, the alternative is the Eagles making the playoffs. I'm kind of questioning the competitive spirit of our fan base and our football team here in the Metroplex, because there's a lot of people, doesn't matter, they're just going to get ran in the wild card round if they happen to get in. Well, what do you mean? You want to watch the Eagles in the playoffs? Like, how does that make sense? I'm a fan of fighting and not rolling over and dying, which is what our football team did last night. But guess what? Last night's game didn't matter. And guess what? Quite honestly, the game against the Rams next week probably doesn't matter. It'd be nice to win it, but it probably doesn't matter. So everyone needs to relax. Everyone's really emotional. Things are bad. Jason Garrett's going to get fired. We're fine. We're all going to get what we want here. Jason Garrett's going to lose his job just at the end of this season. You have to wait.
Now, if he does a typical Jason Garrett, turn the season around when everybody gives up on him and they make the playoffs, if they make the playoffs, is he going to get fired?
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Still,
yeah.
What makes you say that? What's different about this year?
They're just done. They were done with this after the Packers game. I think I mentioned this to you on the show.
They? I mean, Jerry's not done. Doesn't sound like it.
Oh, Jerry's done.
Really?
Yeah, he just doesn't. Yeah, he just doesn't want to do it in the middle of the season. And I understand it. Like he's tight with Jason. He doesn't want to do it in the middle of the season. He wants to let him finish it out. And he feels like, weirdly, I think Jerry feels like he owes it to Jason. And he shouldn't. He does not owe it to Jason. But I do think he wants to give Jason a chance to dig out of this and go make the playoffs and see what happens. But they know. Last year, they knew when they traded for Amari Cooper, they knew that they were done with Scott Linehan as offensive coordinator. But what did they do? They let him hang around. They let him call plays for the whole year until that Week 17 game where mysteriously Scott Linehan was kept out of the offensive game plan and Dak threw for 4 touchdown passes, 3 to Blake Jarwin all over the middle of the field. That was very mysterious. And then back to the same old game plan in the playoffs. They knew they were done with Linehan. It's the exact same thing. They knew early on this year, and I think the Packers game is the specific one when I started hearing things and I started kind of going, oh, yeah, you can't kind of tell. They knew that they were moving on from Jason. At the beginning of the year, it was end up in the Final Four of the NFL. It's not that anymore. It's now Super Bowl. That's the only way Jason could save his job is by going to the Super Bowl.
So is the difference here that members of the front office now are encouraging Jerry to make a move, whereas in the past that hasn't happened? Is that, I mean, listen, you guys have been through hell with Jason Garrett, lest you forget. And so that's what I'm trying to figure out. I know McClay has come out publicly, and that's something that people, can look at, something specific. But as a total disconnected outsider, Jerry Jones has been doing this since Jimmy Johnson. But he's had the cover of a bad team. This is the first time where there really is a roster where you could have legitimate Super Bowl expectations. And Jerry's kind of doing the same thing. Jerry Jones, the fact that he says, well, Jason will end up somewhere coaching. I mean, what is that? It's like Jerry's somehow topping himself with these ridiculous statements. But I'm just trying to figure out what's changed, because I don't think he's going to fire Garrett, and I think Garrett's coming back next year. How about that?
Really?
What do you think about that?
How much do you want to put on that? Because I'm going to double my deposit at mybookie.ag with the promo code Fancred. I'm going to double my deposit, and I'm going to put in a lot of money because I'm going to win that one. I promise you. Jason's gone.
Yeah.
He is gone.
And we'll take away half of your deposit if you put the promo code FadeBrooks in there, right?
Yeah. Is that
You'd
true?
You'd be fading me, right? No, that's not true.
Yeah, okay.
But
I'm going to start typing that in just to see if it works.
No, but we should do a Fade Brooks promo where you can actually make money on it. But I'm just saying that what everyone should be focused on, God knows, Kevin, I said this to you last time, went on and on about it. Everyone should be laser focus on Jerry freaking Jones. That's the problem. Jason Garrett is a symptom, but I don't know, you probably heard this. Troy Aikman said last night it was the ultimate diss when he said, I don't know if you could really fire Jason Garrett right now because you don't have a single guy on the staff who could be the interim coach.
Which I disagree with Jason on that because you can. It doesn't matter. It could be the mascot Rowdy who's the head coach.
Right,
it just needs to not be Jason. It's the same thing every week. It's the same thing. There's a reason why last night's game looked just like that game on Thanksgiving Day because they don't change anything. Last night on defense, they were missing Leighton Vander Esch. They were missing defensive tackle Antoine Woods. They were missing their starting strong safety, Jeff Heath. They were missing guys on defense. But they do not do anything to make things difficult on opposing quarterbacks, especially young guys. Sam Darnold, Josh Allen, Jeff Driscoll in the Detroit game. And then last night, and Mitch Trubisky. They didn't make any adjustments. And Chris Richard, when Chris Richard was hired to be the passing game coordinator, he took over for Marinelli in terms of calling the defensive plays, although Rod Marinelli is still technically the defensive coordinator, a guy who went 0-16 in Detroit, by the way, although I like Rod. Chris Richard got fired in Seattle. Like, does everyone remember that? Because here in Dallas, Chris Richard is going to get head coaching interviews. I mean, look at that fire that he brought in his first year as head coach. And then you're like sitting there going, okay, so where are the adjustments? Last night, what killed you in the first half more than anything? Mitch Trubisky running on you. Maybe we'll make some adjustments. No, they made no adjustments at all. Mitch Trubisky kept running on them. They were counting on Jalen Smith to run from the middle of the field out to the numbers to make plays, and that's not the type of player that Jalen Smith is. There's a reason Leighton Vander Esch normally makes a lot of those plays because he's a little better than Jalen Smith. Jalen Smith's a fine player, but you're going to ask him to make all those plays running sideline to sideline. That is not his game. Those adjustments that aren't happening. So why is Chris Richard seen as like the next thing? He's not. I'm a big believer in Kellen Moore. I'm a big believer in Kellen Moore, especially if you take the Jason Garrett, off his shoulder back here. If we get rid of Jason over here with his offensive ideas and let Kellen do the offense, I think you would see some really great things in that offense. So, it's frustrating. I disagree with Troy. Anybody can go run this thing for the next 3 days. I would rip the Band-Aid off. Jerry does not want to do that. He is too loyal. Too loyal.
We're visiting, of course, with Kevin Turner, and he's got the About Them Cowboys podcast on The Athletic. Check that out. About Them Cowboys podcast on The Athletic. Long-time radio host in Dallas. And now let's talk specifically about who possibly could replace Jason Garrett and the mybookie.ag odds on that. Ron Rivera is the favorite, recently jettisoned by the Panthers at plus 200. What do you think about Rivera and who else?
Not a chance. Ron Rivera will not happen. Let's go ahead and get him out of there. That's not going to happen. Or be wise with your money. The report from Jane Slater last night was interesting from the NFL Network. I don't know if you saw that. That Steven has talked to Urban Meyer already. And Urban Meyer, mysteriously, about a month and a half ago, Urban Meyer, made comments like, Dallas is like the one job you have to take. Urban Meyer, interesting. Urban Meyer once called Zeke Elliott the smartest athlete he's ever coached. Loves Zeke. Just interesting. Keep that in mind. Lincoln Riley, again, they have ties to. I kind of walked that through on your show last week about how Oklahoma had talked to John Stephen Jones, the son of Stephen Jones, about going to college. John Stephen Jones, who plays quarterback at Arkansas. Lincoln Riley, I think, is in the mix. That is my favorite, but I don't see them stopping right there. I think they will branch this thing out and go for guys who currently have jobs. Sean Payton has a deal. Like, he's got a contract that we know of. You would have to trade for Sean Payton. With Belichick, still amazing that the terms of his deal are not disclosed. We know that he makes $12.5 million, but we don't know how long he's the coach of the Patriots. And I'm assuming he and Robert Kraft have probably have some, under the table agreement where it's, we'll go by year, probably something like that. I thought it was curious that Josh McDaniels didn't take the Colts job when he had it offered, like he took it and then backed out. Because I was wondering if he was maybe told, well, hey, Bill's not going to be here forever. So that was very curious to me as well. So those are some things to keep in mind. Those are my big names are the heavy hitters, okay? Lincoln Riley, Urban Meyer, if they want to go that route, and they're going to make calls to Sean Payton and Bill Belichick. You can count on that.
Wow. So
guarantee
it sounds like, for the most part at least, we've got a Bill Parcells type of hire in play as opposed to a Jason Garrett personality profile or background, right? This time around, Jerry's about ready to hand the keys to somebody and maybe pipe down a little bit. Is that fair?
Well, yeah. Would you agree, the outlier here being Lincoln Riley, because he's relatively new to being a head coach, but would you agree that Lincoln Riley has enough clout that we're not kind of looking at Lincoln Riley as a developmental head coach?
Right. And I think Jerry can't afford it. I mean, it doesn't matter what he can afford. He can do whatever he wants at this point, and he will do whatever he wants. I think it's pretty clear by now. But, yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, sure. That's a really interesting hire, and I don't know the relationship dynamics behind it. I know Riley's a Texas guy. Obviously, he's got a pedigree and a resume that goes to Texas Tech. Remember him very well and involved with Mike Leach. But I don't know. I mean, how do you think that would be received in Dallas with the fans and the media if they went to Riley? I mean, I guess it's been normalized and desensitized to the point where people might be into that hire and be satisfied with that.
Oh, well, first of all, if your name is not Jason Garrett and you're the head coach, you're going to already start out way up here. Like, you're going to be doing great. It doesn't matter. I'm telling you, like, Taco Charlton was like a guy who got killed and they traded him to the Dolphins. If Taco Charlton retired, was head coach of the Cowboys, people would be like, you know what? It's not Jason. I mean, he was a bust, but like, we'll see. Like, it's that bad.
Oh my God, that's a meme. That's a hashtag, not Jason. That's what hashtag.
Get those T-shirts, not Jason. Now, and I never want a guy to lose his job. I'm very sensitive to that stuff. But Jason also makes $6 million a year. He gets paid like a top of the line head coach in the NFL, and the results don't match up. With Lincoln Riley, that would be highly accepted. That would be coveted, because I think what you would do, and Lincoln Riley will have some say. I think what's going to take, there's two, maybe three things that you got to think about with Lincoln Riley. One, what is his personality? What does he want? Does he just want to coach Oklahoma for the rest of his life? I don't know that. But Lincoln Riley could go coach the Cowboys, and if it doesn't work, he could get a head coaching job in college tomorrow. Like, he doesn't.
Maybe Texas.
There'd be no downtime for him. He would be fine, right? Two, how much would he be contingent on bringing his own staff? The Cowboys would have let him bring up most of his staff, but I love the idea of Lincoln Riley as your head coach. That's what it would take to get him. Get Lincoln Riley as your head coach. Kellen Moore stays as your offensive coordinator and your play caller, unless Lincoln wants to call plays, okay? But Kellen stays as your offensive coordinator, and specifically, Kellen is here to take over a few things: play design, route concepts, the passing game, things like that, as well as analytics, which is something Jason has walked to the podium a million times and said, we don't really believe in that here. They have an analytics department. They give him numbers. He's just too stubborn and arrogant to believe in those numbers, which is fine. You don't have to. He's got more experience than me. It's easy for me to say. But I think when you haven't won, that it might be wise to maybe check into everything, like maybe call around and see, maybe I should take this into account here because we're struggling. We're struggling. It's listless. It's a rudderless ship right now. I thought it should have been done before the year started, and then I thought it should have been done after the Buffalo game, okay? And I thought it should have been done last night, because what's the point? What's the point of this thing? You're still in first place. Is that the point you want to keep him because you're going to the playoffs? Well, why don't you go ahead and try to get to the playoffs and try to get hot? This team's not going to get hot and go into the playoffs. You're going to backpedal into the playoffs.
So the final word, what name should people, when they go to mybookie.ag, they get their deposit doubled thanks to the promo code Fancred. After they do that, what name should they go with on the Cowboys head coach?
Right now, I think Lincoln Riley makes more sense than anyone else. I truly believe that. Now, again, there's still a lot to find out about Lincoln and what matters to him. And by the way, he's got bigger fish to fry by beating a very bad Baylor team tomorrow. Shout out to all my Baylor fans out there. Yeah, Baylor's horrible. Maybe it's because I've lived down here for too long. I've grown up my entire life of Baylor fans telling me, watch out for next year's recruiting class. Matt Rule is awesome. Matt Rule is awesome, and the Jets could have Matt Rule as their head coach if they would have let him bring his own staff. But that Baylor team – that Baylor team nearly lost to Texas Tech against Texas Tech's backup quarterback. And I'm pulling for Utah big time tonight as well. I've kind of made myself a bandwagon Utah fan. I'm a big draft guy. They've got 6 guys going to the Senior Bowl, so I'm really excited about Utah tonight. And then hopefully I'm sorry, this is a Cowboys topic, right? But hopefully Georgia doesn't beat LSU tomorrow, so the committee has to make a decision.
Right.
Because we need chaos, and we need not 8, but 16 teams in the playoffs. We need a 16-team playoff.
I think the most important issue right now is to make sure Tom Herman continues as coach of the Texas Longhorns for as long as possible. When you've got a guy headbutting players without a helmet on before games on nationals, Tom Herman has to stay on as Texas coach.
You know, Tom Herman's trying to be Jim Harbaugh. He's trying to be the intense guy. Oh yeah, I'll headbutt you. I'll get some blood on me. You know, he's trying to do that bit. And it's like, dude, you're the Michigan of the South here. just do your own thing, man.
I'm going to steal that. The Michigan of the South.
Yeah, it's kind of Texas, right? At this point, like, where are your big wins at?
Yeah.
College football's fun. I love college football too. But I'll say this: the Cowboys have the Rams next week. Amari Cooper ended up having 6 catches and 90 yards and a touchdown last night. But like, I would highly consider resting him if he's not 100%.
If they're not going to, I mean, the other big thing here, I think, is we've talked about Zeke Elliott not performing this year, but they really haven't made a commitment to him at all. And when it comes to offense, and I think that's a big subject that really people are talking about him not being the same guy. We don't even know because they haven't made a commitment to that part of the offense. It's more about Dak and what an amazing job he's done, and they're throwing so much, but they haven't been balanced. So, well, dude, I can't thank you enough, Kevin. I really appreciate you jumping on. Thanks for all that. That was great. We got to get a song going next time. All right.
Yeah. Right.
Give you a heads up on it. Yeah.
I'm a horrible singer. So, but I do like to play it. It's fun. It's good. It gets your mind off things. So,
yeah. A little different, man. Thanks so much, man. I appreciate it.
Anytime, and enjoy a fun week of football, and we'll see you soon.
Absolutely. That's Kevin Turner of About Them Boys, the podcast. He's also a longtime radio personality in Dallas, and that's his appearance, and it's sponsored by mybookie.ag. They'll double your deposit with the promo code Fancred. Yeah, we have to rip off Darren Ravel and do a Fade Brooks segment or something. That's what Darren Ravel does the Fade Darren, I think it is, something like that. But I promise I won't go to Times Square in my underwear like Darren Ravel unfortunately did once he lost his bet. So looking here through my mentions, my messages, my texts to make sure we don't have anything huge. The one thing that we reported earlier today, if you're just joining us, so we're getting ready to sign off in a second. Graham Harrell not going to be the offensive coordinator at Texas. Look for him to end up as a head coach, possibly at Texas San Antonio. I was going to bring up a name. The other name that was really in play at USC, which I don't think has been reported, is Tony Elliott. Tony Elliott, the offensive coordinator at Clemson, was someone who USC was very interested in hiring as head coach. But it didn't happen, nor did James Franklin happen. You're going to hear about an extension for Franklin coming up. I think that there was a perception in the administration at SC that Franklin may be using SC to get an extension. That may have caused SC to cool a little bit on Franklin. I honestly think that Carol Folt, the president of USC, is in charge completely at this point. That's what's happening. And she made the decision not to hire a new coach. It's Carol Folt. I really believe that. Nothing else adds up. Listen, the buyout's not an issue. If the buyout was in play, it would be paid and there would be a new coach and SC would be business as usual. That's not the case. That's going to do it for this week. Enjoy the games this weekend. We'll be back next week. Our thanks to our producer, Cam Smith. And this is Brooks Melchior saying so long from Los Angeles. And this has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.